So, yeah, have you said everything you need to, Dr. Lambert?
I think so.
Great. Okay, well, let's get into this topic. Quite an interesting one, I think, and it's obviously led on really nicely from our last presentation on weight loss medications. So that's being a really super topical area of interest at the moment for a lot of people. But this also has kind of become a bit more talked about ways that we can actually simulate these satiety hormones in a natural way that these medications are doing in a synthetic way. So really, this is the kind of optimal. This is what we want to be doing naturally, and we want to be getting into these habits. And yeah, for sure, this is some of these things might come more naturally and more easily to some people based on a range of different factors. And we'll talk about that as we go along. But first of all, let's have a quick definition on the difference between hunger and appetite. Kind of an important distinction and just sets the scene for what we're going to be talking about, which is appetite, really. So, hunger is more of a biological need, whereas appetite is the more psychological desire to eat. It's appetite that leads us to overeating, possibly, and that's the one that impacts weight, our metabolic health, our energy levels. So that's why appetite regulation is really important. And a question to all of you: have you ever felt hungry even after eating a full meal? Or perhaps you've craved something even when even though you knew you weren't truly hungry? Put a yes in the comments if you relate to either of those situations. So, ever felt hungry after a full meal, or you've craved something even when you knew you weren't truly hungry? It was actually quite funny. It's like, oh my, so it just makes me think of a story on my third date with my now husband, and we were having a three-course dinner, and I said, "Oh, I'm really full, but I still have my dessert stomach." And he'd never heard this expression. I don't know if anyone's heard this before, but it's almost like you feel you're full, but you're not really satiated. You still have that kind of craving for something sweet. And I managed to convince my husband that we actually had a separate stomach just for sweet food. I mean, it's unbelievable, really, that he managed to believe this, but I guess it was just our third date. He didn't want to upset me or anything. He knew I was a nutritionist, and he thought, well, I better just kind of believe what she says. But it was quite funny that he believed that we actually had this separate stomach, a bit like cows, they have like three separate stomachs. But so it just made me think of that. But I can't see all your comments while I'm presenting, but yeah, put a yes if you agree with that. So the aim of the presentation is we're going to explore really science-backed with references and studies, ways to, and importantly, non-pharmacological ways to suppress our appetite. So with clients, I work quite a lot on these tactics. I deal with lots of different things in clinic, but a lot of the time we're dealing with weight loss as a goal as part of what we're working on. It's usually weight loss is within there somewhere, or working on creating better habits, all of which these encompass. So what we're going to be talking about. So first of all, we've spoken about GLP-1 quite a lot, these GLP-1 agonists, which are like Ozempic, Wegovy, all the ones that you've heard about in the media recently. Those generally are GLP-1 agonists, which means that they are mimicking this hormone, which is produced in the gut to help us feel full and satiated. But we have these two other hormones called ghrelin and leptin. And I kind of like to think of it like ghrelin is almost like the sound of like your stomach gurgling, sort of. So I think of that as like that's how I remember it, as our hunger hormone. And ghrelin rises before we eat and it drops after eating, typically. And then leptin is secreted by our fat cells, and it helps us suppress our appetite over the long term. Once we've eaten, should help us stay satiated for 3 to 4 hours. Some people genetically, though, and I've seen this with my clients on their DNA reports, have more ability to say less ability to create enough leptin, for example. So they actually don't feel as full off the same amount of food as other people. This is a gene called FTO gene, for example. I would have spoken about this in previous presentations. The FTO gene is really famous for being the fat associated gene, and those who have this gene, generally they don't feel satiated from the same meal as someone who doesn't have that gene, which is quite interesting. So we can't always blame ourselves for these things. They are, a lot of them, a lot of these physiological I guess impulses we have to eat more are actually down to our DNA and our code within us, which we can't obviously do much about, but there are ways we can work with our DNA and help to increase, make sure like that leptin level is increased higher. And some people, yeah, just don't, again, they will have more ghrelin, so they'll have less leptin and more ghrelin, and these like imbalance of hormones, yeah, they do just lead people to overeat more. So yeah, GLP-1 we've spoken about, that stands for glucagon-like peptide 1, and PYY, it's a little bit less well known, but that stands for peptide tyrosine. They're both released by the gut after having a meal, particularly from fat and protein, not carbohydrates. And their role is to help increase satiety. But yeah, like I said, we get dysregulation of these hormones, sometimes all of these ones I've spoken about, and that leads to more appetite, more cravings. And then we have to also talk about insulin, which is another hormone. And this one regulates our blood sugar, as a lot of you will know about this one. So it plays a role in our appetite because when we have consistently high insulin from eating processed foods, sugary foods, this dysregulates our appetite. Our blood sugar kind of goes up and down all the time, and that not only leads to more cortisol and more cravings, but it's going to allow more fat to be stored more quickly. And if we store more fat around our middle, that also increases our cravings for food as well. So the fat that's stored around our organs, that particularly is that metabolically active fat, and that fat will release hormones which allow us to, or make us crave foods a little bit more. So that's something to be aware of as well. If your waist circumference is, you just have to check that, is if it's over 100 centimeters, you're at risk of a bit more insulin resistance there around the middle, and therefore more cravings for these foods. So I have to start with protein because it is the most satiating macronutrient, and we'll spend more time talking about protein than the other two macros. So protein is so important because it stimulates the release of those two hormones, PYY and GLP-1. So it sends those strong fullness signals straight to the brain. And protein also reduces the ghrelin levels, that hunger hormone, much more effectively than carbohydrates or fats. And it's slows gastric emptying as well, which I know is really important for staying fuller for longer. Our recommended intake is about 1.2 to 1.6 grams of your ideal body weight. And that is higher than what it looks like if you were to look at the standard government recommendations. They're a little bit outdated. I think for the UK, it's maybe 1 gram, I'm trying to remember now, 1 gram per kilogram of body weight, which now seeing with more research, that doesn't seem to be quite enough for a lot of people. So yeah, I think those will be updated a little bit higher soon into our government recommendations. And oh, there's a study here which I hadn't, there's a study which was in 2015. Sorry, I meant to put that at the protein leverage hypothesis. That's going to be our next slide. But in that case, I meant to put this study, which shows that when individuals had a diet 25 to 30% from protein, all the calories they ate was from protein, that dramatically reduce their daily hunger levels and late night snacking as well. So, protein leverage hypothesis. This is an interesting one. So, this is a theory that helps explain why we often feel hungry, even after eating maybe a carb heavy meal or a snack with little protein. I mean, for example, if I ever have a McDonald's, which is very rare, I have to say, but if I do, then I notice I feel very hungry within even just an hour of eating, maybe even less. And often, well, it's quite a lot of reasons. They're obviously very processed, but they are typically quite low in protein. Um, those ultra processed foods, fast food. So that is, well, the protein leverage hypothesis basically states that the body has a strong biological drive for amino acids, which made up proteins made up of amino acids. So if you fall short of your need for amino acids for the day, your appetite sort of may then ramp up to compensate. So that's just one more reason why prioritizing high quality protein sources at meals like eggs, tofu, yogurt, chicken, legumes, lentils, those are sort of my favorite. They can help suppress that appetite. And then overall, they're going to support our long term weight loss or a sort of energy balance as well. So you could just say, you're not hungry, you're just proteinated. It's a difficult word to say, under proteined protein. Um, so yeah, this is an interesting one. And I think I've noticed it in myself. If I haven't had enough protein, I will crave more food, but not necessarily protein. That's the problem. You might still be craving more of the carby foods or kind of sugary foods. So maybe check in with yourself next time you feel like, oh, I've had quite a lot to eat today, but I still feel hungry. Maybe check in and see if you've actually had enough protein with every meal. I recommend 25 to 30 grams of protein for every snack and meal. That's really the optimal amount to start and maintain muscle mass as well. And then fiber has to come second because I'm going to say it's up there with protein in its importance. So fiber, well, it's so important because it does so many things, but it helps to regulate our blood glucose levels. So it stops those spikes, it blunts any spike in your blood sugar. And I've noticed this. I've put in a glucose monitor in my arm for a few weeks, and I've noticed the spikes are when I haven't had fiber in a meal. Most of all, even more than perhaps not having protein or fat. Fiber seems to be the really key one because of that slowing down of the food from the stomach. Particularly soluble fiber, that's actually the most important type of fiber to go for rather than insoluble. Soluble, it forms that gel, which really does slow down the rate at which the food moves through the digestive tract. And it can lead to that more gradual release of nutrients and sugars and promotes really prolonged feelings of fullness. So as a 2016 systematic review found that fiber intake significantly decreased energy intake. So most people fall short of the requirement, which it varies from country to country, but for us it's 30 grams here. But I believe it's over 2/3 of people don't reach that figure. And it shouldn't really.
Rebecca, can you say that again?
Sure.
The reduction of fiber decreased energy?
Decreased
Yeah, did
energy.
I hear that right?
Oh, sorry, from the study. So they found that fiber intake significantly decreased energy intake, so calories, because a lot of it passes through us. So it's almost like, free calories. We're not actually taking it in, it's just bulking out the stool. And even with protein, actually, just going back to my favorite macronutrient, Um, protein takes a lot of energy to metabolize, so you actually use 30% of its calories just to metabolize it through something called thermogenesis. So actually also getting 30% of your calories for free for protein as well. So both, yeah, protein and fiber, they're absolutely at the top there for managing your appetite. And I think that's everything on fiber, but this is kind of in a similar vein, low energy density foods, this idea of volume eating, volumetric. So making sure we are choosing foods that have big volume. They're going to kind of um, bulk out the stomach and activate the stretch receptors in the stomach, which then send the fullness signals to our brain. So there's a study that, oh, at the bottom here, yeah. So people ate 25% fewer calories when they started their meals with low energy density foods like a salad or a bone broth or a broth based soup. So that's a really good tactic as well, to feel satiated after your main meal. To have, well, I'll be going on to water, but even just, yeah, a broth based soup is a great one. And so this is just a visual to see like 400 calories of oil doesn't really activate those stretch receptors in the stomach at all. And then meat, maybe a bit more. This is obviously very simplified kind of visual here, but just so you can kind of get this concept in your brain. And that's what kind of say to clients that you just really can go unlimited on the vegetables, try and go for half your plate with non-starchy veg. Obviously we need the fat and we need the protein from oil and chicken, for example, for different things, but in terms of actually just that feeling of fullness for the stomach, that's why volume eating is really important. So thinking about what can I add to each meal. So for example, thinking of my lunch, I was just going to have an omelette and I thought, oh, actually, what can I add to this to bulk it out a bit more? So just adding in some veg there. And think of some other examples in a minute, but let's move on to blood sugar balance, because this is key. And blood sugar imbalance is really common. A lot of people are dealing with it, whether they know it or not. So rapid glucose spikes, they kind of shoot up, that causes insulin surges and then a crash, and that drives our hunger. And there's a 2020 review, which was in Nutrients, which is one of the best journals for nutrition. It highlighted that balancing meals with macronutrients improves appetite control. So really key to try and have a balance of all the three macros: protein, fats, and carbohydrates. And this isn't rocket science, this stuff, it's just fundamental, but it's always a good reminder to know the importance of pairing the three together. And when I say carbohydrates, really I mean fiber. So not your white carb, but a fiber source. So I always say to clients, like, don't have a lonely carb. Make sure it's not like a lonely piece of bread or lonely pasta on its own, but you're actually pairing it with fats and protein, ideally both, and veg and fruit. And also regularity of our eating is really quite key. So every 3 to 5 hours is optimal, especially with protein. Helps keep our blood sugar stable and our appetite really steady as well. I don't know about you, but if I ever go through a period of long eating, I just want to eat everything. And it's like my appetite is then insatiable. I can't stop. So perhaps you can relate to that too. So a stable blood sugar ultimately equals fewer cravings. So again, like rather than just having a piece of fruit, looking at my fruit bowl here now, like banana and some peanut butter is a great snack rather than just the banana on its own. So yes, sometimes perceived hunger is actually thirst. And I mean, I'm guilty of this. I too. I sometimes I don't realize I'm dehydrated until maybe this is too much information. Yeah, go to the toilet and I'm like, oh, okay, my urine's very dark. So I definitely haven't been hydrating as much as I should. So really the color of your urine should be a light straw color. If it's not, you're dehydrated. So 1.5 to 2 liters of water per day, more with physical activity or in the heat. And water definitely does promote short-term satiety. It's probably, not going to keep you full for too long, but it's quite a good tactic before a meal. So 500 milliliters of water in this study, that just in the box here, they gave to participants before their meals and reduced their calorie intake by 22%. It's quite significant, really, if you think of that every day. The compound effect of that would be quite dramatic. And in a similar vein, we'll talk about caffeine and green tea, as obviously both being liquids. They are diuretics, so they will actually cause you to be more dehydrated, because they draw water as you excrete them. But so you do need to drink more if you're having caffeine and green tea, but they actually do quite a good job at suppressing appetite short term as well. And I'm not saying this is a particularly healthy thing. I mean, there are some people that will just have coffee for breakfast and think that's perfectly fine because they feel full until lunch, and I definitely am not promoting that at all. But uh, there is some research behind this. So green tea could be a better option though, probably. So because it's more of an antioxidant, it has lots of other benefits too, and it's going to help with inflammation. And it's just, yeah, it's got a bit more to it than caffeine from coffee, for example. So it's kind of like a modest effect from green tea in terms of our satiety and fat oxidation benefits, but it's kind of supportive, I guess, as part of this like overall approach. It's just one more tool in the toolkit. And yeah, I have to say, obviously, use a caution. Let's not have too much caffeine or have a reliance on it. No more than, oh, is it 400 milligrams, I believe, for us in the UK is the top amount. These are just some supplements. Obviously, I much prefer a food first approach, but these could be quite useful to know about in terms of like some natural supplements that support appetite, and especially effective, obviously, if we combine them with all these other lifestyle changes and dietary changes. Protein powder, I'm quite reliant, I would say reliant, but I use protein powder a lot because it does keep me full when potentially I'm not really feeling like I'm wanting to have protein for a snack, but it's just, it's easy to consume and it doesn't feel too heavy. So, and they do, because they're full of protein, they boost the fullness hormones like GLP-1 and reduce the ghrelin hormone too. So yeah, great as a kind of quick meal if you're really stuck for time, or a snack. Obviously, yeah, we have companies like Huel and they're very popular here. I don't know if they are where you are. Huel, do we know anyone? No? Dr. Lambert's shaking his head. So, okay, that's really interesting because they are a mega company here, and they are a to-go drink that they say they're nutritionally complete with protein and all the vitamins and minerals you need. And there's quite a lot of controversy about them, people having them as a lunch replacement. And I'm not too against it, because if you're probably getting more protein from that than you would be from a meal deal. And if you have meal deals, we kind of get these, supermarkets do these deals where you get a sandwich and a drink and a snack, and they're not generally really nutritionally that great because you're not getting a lot of protein. And they're quite carb heavy in their process. So I would almost rather you potentially have just a protein shake if that keeps you full and satiated. And it would avoid that kind of crash that you get in mid-afternoon sometimes with like a sandwich and a carb heavy meal. Now let me try and say this one right. Glucomannan. Not too sure if that's right. That's it. This is a fiber that expands in the stomach, so it activates those stretch receptors and prolongs our fullness. So just make sure you take lots of water with this one though, to avoid any digestive problems and constipation. 5-HTP, this is actually used to help with sleep a lot of the time, but it may help reduce emotional eating and carb cravings, particularly because of helping to produce serotonin. But just be careful if you're on any antidepressants, there could be a contraindication there, just to let you know. And then green tea extract, you can take this as a supplement, but, especially the active part, which is EGCG. It may slightly reduce, as we know from this research, it may slightly reduce food intake whilst increasing energy expenditure through thermogenesis. And then lastly, chromium picolinate. So this one helps to regulate our blood sugar swings, or blood sugar levels, particularly in people with insulin resistance. Is a good one. But yeah, these are all tools and they're definitely not replacements. So just make sure you're buying good quality. I wouldn't recommend buying off Amazon. I've read some kind of bad things from recently from the kind of supplements that are sold there. There's not much regulation. So Informed Sport is a good one to look out for if they're certified from them. That's a good quality supplement. Now going on to lifestyle strategies. We obviously have to talk about sleep because I don't know about you, but whenever I've had a bad night's sleep, even just one bad night's sleep, my appetite's all over the place. And we know this from research, it clearly backs up even just one bad night's sleep affects your appetite massively the next day and it really alters those hunger regulating hormones big time. So there was a 2004 study which found individuals who slept 4 hours in one night had a 28% increase in that hunger hormone ghrelin and an 18% decrease in leptin, the satiety hormone. That's pretty significant. I think you'll agree. And I think that was just from one night as well. It wasn't even like a compounding effect. So if you can, aim for 7 to 9 hours of quality sleep. But I sometimes laugh when I read kind of all these recommendations now with a child because it's not always quite that easy with the little ones. So I'm saying that after I've just had a very bad night's sleep last night. So as much as we try, sometimes it's realistically, it's not always possible. So particularly remembering these strategies, if you have had a bad night's sleep, really focusing on those high protein foods and fiber rich foods to get you through. And also consistency in your sleep and wake times is quite important for our circadian rhythms and our hormone cycles and how the release of these ghrelin and leptin hormones. 2, stress management. Unfortunately, stress is prevalent and there's not often, we feel there's not a lot we can do about the stress we have in our lives. Problem with stress is that it activates the HPA axis, and that increases our cortisol levels, and cortisol increases cravings, particularly for all the foods we shouldn't really be eating, sugary and salty foods. So cortisol, because it enhances our appetite, and particularly for like the comfort foods, we know there's a big link between stress and increased weight ultimately. So, and sometimes we underestimate the stress in our lives or the impact stress is having on our bodies. So even if you don't feel that stress, sometimes our body is reacting quite badly and our cortisol is very high. You can get a cortisol saliva test quite easily to check what your cortisol is doing. Just make sure it's over a 24-hour cycle, because our cortisol naturally rises and dips. So sometimes we want cortisol to be high, like when we wake up in the morning. Other times we want it low, mid-morning, for example. But so 24-hour test for that one is best. And I mean, some things that can help our body go from uh, sympathetic mode to parasympathetic. So the rest and digest mode is through breath work. Um, there's lots of things you can do on like YouTube to get your body into that rest and digest state. Movement as well helps reduce cortisol, as does social connection, journaling, all that kind of stuff. A few more lifestyle strategies. Mindful eating. This is one I tell people to do all the time, but whether they do it or not, I mean, I know people are so busy and we're so used to having distractions while we're eating. But a study showed that eating whilst distracted leads to 15% more calories from one study. So quite quite significant. And because when we're really focusing on what we're eating, it helps the brain to register fullness cues more. And yeah, we're also enjoying it more because if we're distracted, are we really enjoying the food we're eating? So then are you feeling satiated from, yeah, are you feeling like you've actually enjoyed the food? Or maybe your brain feels like it needs more because you haven't been present. Chewing thoroughly, I mean, that's kind of, yeah, more of a digestive benefit as well, but trying to get it to applesauce consistency when you eat. Number 4, avoid skipping meals, because we know that skipping meals leads to blood sugar crashes and overeating later in the day. Kind of long term, and this is yo-yo dieting or fad dieting. It's why they don't work in the long term, because when we avoid eating for a long time, we that catches up with us eventually, and it leads to the feast or famine mindset. Number 5, lastly, choose solid foods instead of liquid snacks, because this study looked at those who had a liquid snack were 62% more likely to eat more of that at their next meal. So reason for this could be due to the motion of like chewing, which may give our bodies more time to send the fullness cues from our brain, from our stomach to our brain, than quickly consuming liquids. Plus also we're not the stomach isn't getting full. It's obviously just like that image, it's just only taking up a small portion of the stomach. But yeah, it's really unfortunately very easy to consume a lot of calories through liquids.
Rebecca, would that include soups?
Mm, no, I mean, I don't think so. Well, yes and no. I mean, like soups are probably really great as a quick appetite suppressant, as like a healthy way to reduce your intake for the next meal. But I don't. It depends, because you can get lentil soups that are great because they have protein in, but a lot of them are just really quite low in, yeah, in protein. So that's the problem. They're not really going to keep you really very full for long.
Like maybe a tomato soup. It doesn't have that bulk,
Exactly. Yeah.
but then
Yeah.
maybe like a squash soup, a lentil soup.
Yes, those are good. Even when you have the lentils kind of unblended, I think that's almost even better, because then your stomach has to do the harder work of breaking it down. But rather than the ones that are or have lentils in but are blended, that's probably going to keep you satiated a little bit less longer. Or like the chunks of vegetables as well, they're quite good because, yeah, it requires more work for the body to break down. So let's go. We're nearly done. Let's just see how we're doing on time. Okay, 20 minutes too. So let's just see how many slides. Oh, just 2 more slides left. So movement and exercise. It's really important, even though you might not think it. You might think it's actually going to make you more hungry. Actually, the research doesn't really point in that direction. and moderate intensity exercise. So that would include fast walking, just even for 30 minutes is enough to really suppress your appetite by lowering ghrelin and increasing GLP-1. So just walks between lectures, for example, for you guys. Short home workouts. It doesn't have to be anything too major. You don't have to be going to gym and lifting loads of crazy weights. Um, and a top tip is uh, to go for a walk after you have a meal, particularly at lunchtime, to make sure you're absorbing the sugar from your meal from the blood sugar into your muscles, and that's going to stop that drop in blood sugar we often experience after lunch, post lunch slump, as I often call it. And delay technique, I mean, this depends on your past with emotional eating and your relationship with food. And yeah, I'm not saying this is always something you need to do or is a good idea, but if you are finding the cravings are coming along a lot, try and distract yourself. Easier said than done, I know, in the moment, and wait 10 to 15 minutes. And hopefully, a lot of the time, you'll see it passes or reduces in intensity. Um, Keeping trigger foods outside. This one's a big one for me, actually, because as soon as I have something in the house, I will eat it. And I think it's partly down to personality as well. I think sometimes maybe being a bit more of a visual person. If I see it, I kind of want it, but if I don't see it, it's out of mind, outside, out of mind. So really, just very practical, kind of simple things here, but also, unfortunately, a lot of us do just we eat out of emotional hunger rather than physical hunger, and this is absolutely fine if you do. That's completely normal and natural. It's just when it starts taking over, that's when, are we using it too much as a crutch, then it's probably time to try and find avenues, slightly healthier avenues to distract yourself from that emotional eating. So yeah, or it's even things like being aware of the situation, like, am I eating because I'm hungry, or because it's offered, or because I'm in a social situation, or because it's convenient? And again, it's having compassion for yourself, because sometimes those situations are completely valid too, and eh, we won't always, not eat or say no to eating if we're in a social situation. That's not always a healthy thing to do either. So it's just when it starts, you start noticing a consistent pattern, and it starts to feel like it's taking over a bit. And lastly, a hunger scale is often used for people to just check in with themselves on a scale of 1 to 10. How am I doing on the hunger scale? And a lot of people do eat when they're maybe on a, like, I say like a 7 to 8. So if 10 is when you're stuffed, maybe some people would even start, just maybe even out of habit, they'll start just noticing that little pang of hunger and think they need to start eating, when actually maybe we should be thinking about being a 3 on that scale. Obviously not starving, but and probably not you're having your stomach rumbling at that point, but just being a bit further along that scale. So yeah, kind of in your head, aim to eat when you're about a 3 or a 4, where you're kind of gently hungry, and then stop eating when you're at a 6 to a 7, comfortably full. So then that just helps to train our internal cues, really, and prevents overeating. It's just good habits to get into. Food and mood journal, you can log meals alongside your emotions. It kind of helps to reveal different patterns in emotional or habitual eating as well. It just gives a bit more self-awareness and helps to support behavior change, which is the hardest thing, really, to change our behavior. Unfortunately, we can get so ingrained in the ways that we do things. And just a few practical things, like planning meals and snacks ahead. Obvious things, but also quite hard to get into the practice of doing. Now, I don't think there's many good options for quick snacks, healthy snacks, personally in the UK. You know, I feel like really I have to prep snacks in order to feel satiated. I don't know about where you guys live, but there's just not really good options for snacks particularly. So yeah, plan your meals around protein and fiber, particularly on healthy fats as well. Um, those three: protein, fiber, and healthy fats. So to keep our blood sugar stable and cravings at bay, hopefully. A few healthy snack ideas: Greek yogurt and berries and peanut butter, boiled eggs, hummus, carrots, mixed nuts and dried fruit, a little bit of dried fruit, not too much, and protein smoothies. So protein smoothies are great because you can get all those plant points in as well and meet your protein needs and add in some nut butter so you're getting healthy fats. It's kind of my favorite way to pack all the good stuff in, and I kind of make it in the morning and take it with me on the go, and that keeps me going most in the morning. So, and then glass of water before eating as well, just to get into the habit of that easy, free thing to do. And so, as a conclusion, um, hopefully you can see that appetite regulation, it doesn't require extreme dieting or medications, and it's really about working with your body, not against it. And the key takeaways I want you to remember: protein, fiber, they're the top two, and also hydration as well, support hormonal appetite control, and lifestyle factors too: sleep, stress, movement, and those other behavioral tools like the hunger scale, food journaling, and planning as well all help build long-term habits. And then you can add in things like supplements too, as like a cherry on top of the cake, but your cake is those things. So try not to get swayed by marketing sales stuff, which, just typing in like GLP-1 supplement, you could get a whole load of different kind of healthy looking supplements, and they're fine, but also they're probably going to be quite expensive really for when you could actually buy the real food for less, and actually, rather than a supplement that's not going to do anything else, um, you could actually just be eating the real food and it can do very similar things. So yeah, I think that is everything from me, and I'll take it to the floor now. So would love to answer your questions.